interesting because a lot of what we've talked about up to this point, whether it's innovation or finance, those topics are pretty much in house. It could be, how can I put it? It's either rote tasks that you would just complete over and over again. Some of this could even be automated. But with the legal considerations, this is something where you really need a lot of expertise. And hold on, let me make sure that we got all. I think we're still waiting on LinkedIn to kick in. LinkedIn is always the last one to connect for some reason. Here we go. All right, bet. So now we're live with everybody. Here we go. So, a lot of the other functions, again, some of it can even be automated. It's a little bit more maintenance based. But with legal considerations, you really do need to be very intentional, and there is a high level of expertise required to do that. Some things you can use templates for. I'll be honest, there are things that I use a template for, especially stuff that I've done before with an attorney. And then now I'm like, oh, I just need to do the next iteration of it, or I'm just doing some light touch ups. But there are very few things that I do in my company without an attorney. Like, I just don't do it because I do not play. And no, it's not because I grew up wanting to be an attorney, because I did, but it's really more so because I know the value of legal accuracy, of legal acumen, legal relationships, and it's just not something that you want to play with. But we're going to talk about that in a second. I am Kaylin Romaine. I'm an organizational psychologist and executive coach, and I'm the host of the Fast Forward podcast. So, my YouTube, either live watchers or people who will see the replay, that's probably where you're going to find this. And I have been doing this work for 17, 18 years. I cannot believe it's almost 20 years that I've been walking this path, but that's a whole other conversation, too. But I love what I do as an organizational psychologist and as an executive coach, particularly for my business coaching clients. A lot of what I offer them is expertise in the structure of their company. So, everything from formation to org design. And then I also support them with maximizing the company's potential. So, whether that is through innovation and product development or through leadership development and employee development. But one of the running threads of the advice that I always have to give my clients as an organizational psychologist is around legal considerations. And I am not an attorney. I always make sure to say that. If you've ever signed up with coaching with me, you know I have a disclaimer rather, that you agree to with the agreements that I'm not a lawyer or a doctor. But at the same time, I do offer forms of legal advice based on my experience with employment law, business law, etc. And I always recommend that they find an attorney. So that is my first point. And I'm going to be looking over here at my notes, of course. So you'll see me looking to the side periodically. But the number one piece of advice that I can give you: get an attorney. Like, you're not a lawyer. 1-800 lawyer, what is it? All the like standby companies. And believe me, I have used them before. My very first company was formed. Actually, this company, so but the first iteration of it, so when it first started, it was formed with LegalZoom. And so there is a place for ad hoc legal support, but you need an attorney. You need someone who has finished law school, who has passed the bar for the state in which your business will be formed, or they are licensed to practice law in the country in which your business will do business. You cannot, you can't fake legal expertise. Like, and I know lawyers sometimes can be a pain to deal with. I've actually had great experiences with my attorneys, but I know sometimes it can feel daunting. And let me also say this. So this is actually a really good consideration too. Depending on what other experience you've had with attorneys, that will impact how you interact with a business attorney. So if your only experience with an attorney, for example, is when you were going through a contentious divorce, no, you're probably not going to be that excited to talk to a business lawyer. If you had to have a criminal defense attorney, no, you might not have the best idea of lawyers. And I think owning your prior relationship with attorneys makes a huge difference. In that regard, is similar to any other professional, whether a doctor or a dentist. If you've had a history of negative interactions with legal professionals, you'll need to address that so that you can have a healthy relationship with the legal counsel that you need for your business, because you can't just not have one. Like technically you could get by with doing your own finances. Like you could be your own bookkeeper or use an automation service or some type of system. You could even get away with doing your own taxes up to a certain point. Once your business hits a certain phase, you should not be doing your own taxes. But legal stuff, again, it's just in my experience, you are always going to want to have the expertise of an actual lawyer. Like, I cannot stress that enough. And if you're honest with yourself about the negative feelings that you have about an attorney or the negative experiences that you've had with the legal field, period, you can actually start your legal relationship in earnest. So you can be honest with your lawyer as you have discovery calls to say, hey, I'm used to my attorneys not really paying attention to me. I'm used to my attorneys not asking thorough questions. I'm used to my ideas being this to be a partnership. Are you open to that? And pay attention to what they say. You don't have to just take the first attorney that comes along. You don't have to take the first attorney that comes along. You get to pick the attorney. You can have different attorneys for different things. It's not that you need a stacked legal team of 12 people, but you might have an attorney that you use for this area of your business and an attorney that you use for this other area, because most attorneys are going to have specialties. So, again, ask the questions, confront your own biases about the legal field, but do not go it alone, because you're going to hit a point where that has now become more than just a harm. It's actually going to be detrimental to your overall business. The next point that I want to make is that preventive legal support is better than prescriptive. So there are certain things that I've done even before it looked like it was time in my business, but I did it on purpose so that number one, I wasn't scrambling trying to find legal help, at a moment's notice, but number two, so that I would be able to avoid problems rather than try to solve them. So I want to say it was about 20 2021, yeah, because I was in Atlanta. So 2021 I made excuse me, significant legal investments in my company. I made significant legal investments in my company because I wanted to have the right contract templates. I wanted to catalyze the intellectual property protection process. That's a lot of P's. And I wanted to make sure that I understood what was common and expected as far as legal protections for my company as a consulting agency. This is me coming from working in house at really large firms and very evolved tech startups. So I'm used to having a gang of lawyers that I talk to, or just like very sophisticated legal systems in a company. And while I knew that I didn't necessarily need all of what I saw my former employers have, I did know that I would need some of that. So I thought it was smart to talk to an attorney who was used to working with small businesses to kind of survey the landscape and then time out how I would protect myself, because there is a cost associated with all of this. So the first thing that I invested in was contracts. For me, it was important that I had the right NDA set up. It was also important that I had the right independent contractor agreements for the state I was based in. Because the other part to this is that I was new to Georgia, and so some of the forms I had been using or some of the ways I had been thinking about it was based on California law or New York law. So I needed to understand from a Georgia barred attorney what is the standard for Georgia businesses. I also wanted to get support and understanding employment law in Georgia, which is very different than the other states that I'd run a business in. So some states are employer friendly, other states are employee friendly. Georgia is an employer friendly state. New York, California, they are employee friendly. And so again, I needed to understand that landscape because I knew it was drastically different. And the people that I was hiring, they lived in other states and even other countries. So I didn't want to go that alone. I also wanted to get the right contracts for licensing because I developed trainings and other models. I have my employee experience survey product, and I knew eventually I might want to license that. I don't know how to write up licensing agreements, and this is actually where my experience with working at the Walt Disney Company was important because I knew I'm like intellectual property is everything. You could build $1 billion business if you have the right products. So I went the route of making sure that I had just like a blanket licensing agreement. And then I also created a service agreement template. So again, this is just providing consulting services, what would need to be there. Going to an attorney for those services. Now, altogether, it took, because it takes them a while to review, create the template. You all talk back and forth about whether or not this is a fit, etc. So, altogether, for all the contracts, it probably took about 3 months. I think altogether, I probably paid maybe $4 or $5,000, and so that was for what 5 or 6 different types of agreements. This was based on what my business needed. And because I also had them look at what would happen for coaching. So with that, it's not necessarily a contract, but it was like, hey, what content would need to be on my sign up form? Again, this was specific to my business, so you might have something different. And it was a useful process because number one, I got the templates that I needed. So, and I still use them. Like there have been a couple of updates because, of course, laws change. So it's 4 years ago. So things have evolved a little bit, but it's been super helpful. I still use those same blanket contracts and the original ones and just make edits. But it also taught me all the areas of protection that I needed. So, what is indemnification? What do I want to put as a different payment term types? How do I want to list out the scope of work and what should be there? What do I want to offer as far as titling and leveling with independent contractors? What types of IP protection do I want to give that are mutual, that favor me, and then sometimes my favor the other party? Understanding the limitations of NDAs. That whole process of walking through creating those documents, that's been a game changer for me. It has changed the way I hold discovery calls. It's changed the way I hire people. It has changed the way I manage my team because I want to make sure that my everyday business processes do not undermine my legal protections. So when you see what's in your contracts and you see what's in your agreements, then you get to make a decision about, okay, you know what? I want to conduct my business in this way. Here's a great example. And I actually just advised the client on this like a month ago. So, Georgia is a state where, again, like I said, it is employer friendly. However, they have pretty interesting laws and policies around independent contractor status. And so, if you aren't going to hire on employees, meaning people who get a paycheck will be considered W 2. And instead, you are going to have independent contractors or 1099s. You have to run your business in a particular way. So, In Georgia, if someone is an independent contractor, there is an expectation that they will have almost full and complete autonomy over their work. So you cannot, literally by law, you cannot micromanage them. You shouldn't be managing their day to day performance. They have the right to take on other clients. So if someone is a 1099 independent contractor for your company, you can't tell them that they can't work for other people. You also have the right, you have to tell them up front what is the projects that they're working on. So if I come on and I work for a company as an HR director, I might have some tasks and then you might change it over time. You cannot do that with independent contractors. Whatever their scope of work is, that's their scope of work. And if you change that scope of work, then you have to recontract with them. So there are seven considerations. This particular law and policy changed around, I think it's 2000, either 22 or 23. Well, think about how most people treat 1099s, especially companies that don't want to hire people and they just want to pay folks, right? As contractors, they probably are not managing folks like that. They probably are not giving people full autonomy. And so, what I had to advise my client is like, hey, look, you have to change the way you interact with people. You have to change the way you talk to your employees, or I'm sorry, you have to change the way you talk to your staff. Because then that was the other thing. It was like, hey, do not ever call somebody an employee, because employee has a very specific legal definition in the state of Georgia. Instead, say the team. You know, we don't say come work with me. We say, hey, come collaborate with us, come partner. Like, very specific language change in your everyday language. And it is quite a shift. So again, that's just an example on the employment side of how legal considerations are important, and understanding those legal considerations. The other part I want to bring out for you with this is that laws change. And one of the greatest benefits, and that's actually going to get to my next point too, but one of the biggest benefits of having an actual lawyer, right, is that they are paying attention to legal changes. They are paying attention to the law, legal trends, new precedents, all types of things. You probably are not paying attention to that. You're doing your work. Even me as an organizational psychologist, I learned some things. It's usually related to employment law, but I learned some things. But I'm not a lawyer. I still have to consult with people and pay attention to law, um, lawyers and legal advocates, right? And their expertise. So I watch videos on YouTube, read articles, etc. This is why it is important, and this is my next point, to have dedicated legal partnership instead of always prioritizing ad hoc partners. So again, I get it. You know, if you got an immediate need, you want to just pay somebody, move it along. Cool. I get that. But one of the benefits I found to having dedicated legal support, either on retainer or at least just going to the same person for case by case support, is that they know the big picture of my business. So for example, my attorney, she primarily handles my IP protection, so that's intellectual property with trademarks and copyrights and things like that. But the deal with why she is so important to my business, she is so important to my business because she has seen my business's evolution in this growth phase. She gets my business and gets me. So I actually just had to talk to her last week about something. Somebody playing and doing something. Anyway, I ain't gonna get into that. Somebody playing. That's all I say. So she and I were talking about a trademark that is moving forward, but I was like, "Why are we on the phone?" Because we normally catch up. Because again, I don't always talk to her, even though she is my dedicated person. I'm not always in communication with her, but she just again has worked with me for years now. So I was like, "Girl," because again we cool. So I was like, "Girl, let me tell you what's going on." I said, and I just want to know what type of lawyer I would need to protect myself. She was like, "All right, bet. What's up?" So I'm telling her and explaining this problem, and she lays the whole thing out to me. So she gives me the background and the context of the different ways that this potential legal issue could play out. She talks about ways that I have protected myself up to this point, told me what I was doing right in the situation, told me what I needed to change, what I should stop doing, etc. She was able to give me all of that legal advice because I have now worked with her for 4 years, right? In many different capacities. She knows how I operate my business. She knows the scope of my business. She knows my target audience and market and the types of things that they would look out for as far as legal protections to feel comfortable working with me. She understands the brand image that I project and how I want to protect that. She gets me. When you are always pursuing ad hoc legal support, they don't have that context. They don't have that context. And while it doesn't necessarily result in them giving you bad advice, know that they can only be empowered to the level of disclosure that you offer. And because you are probably experiencing a crisis or a time sensitive issue, you might not even remember to give them all the information. So one thing in this conversation with this young lady, because again, this situation, it had me frazzled, irritated. I had to sit on it because it happened, let's say, like a week before I had a chance to talk to her. Because again, I had a scheduled appointment for something else. So I'm caught up in the swirl of this. Well, she was able to bring up, like, hey, you know what? Yeah, because I remember a couple years ago, you were talking about blah, blah, blah. And I know you've been working on this, da, da, da. They get you. They get you. And I hadn't even remembered all of that. And so, again, it's important for you to have the context in your legal partnership and support. Context matters because law is so funny in that one little nuance can completely shift the decisions that you make. One little change, one little added detail can completely change the advice that an attorney would give, and you want to empower them to do the best that they can by you and your business. So now let's talk about what are the areas of protection that your business would need. So first and foremost, formation and maintenance. You actually might want to consult an attorney to think about how you structure your business from the beginning. So most people just default to starting an LLC, but it might be helpful for you to actually start a C corp or an S corp. You know, if you are a nonprofit, you want to think about that, or if you're starting a foundation, those require different considerations for formation. What state you choose to form your business. Let me make a note about this. Don't assume, oh, I'm gonna go to Delaware or Wyoming or this place. I could just start a corporate. Because things like double taxation, maintenance, even registered agent support of receiving mail, sometimes it's just not worth all the hassle. Like I know for me, it's always been easier to just start an LLC in the state in which I lived. Now, because y'all know I done relocated a few times, it has meant that I had to open up, close up, which felt like a pain at times, but for taxation purposes, for registration purposes, for legal protection purposes, it was just easier because I'm living in that state. I receive mail in that state, right? I know the tax laws generally in that state. It just simplified it a lot. Now, what I have done is I have foreign entities in other states where I do business. Sometimes because that's required, especially if you're working on public contracts. Not always, but usually, right? So I have to be registered as a foreign entity, but my base company is based in the state that I live. So Forward Collective Group is based in Georgia, full stop, because that's where I live. And like I said, I've made that an intentional decision for every state that I've lived in as long as I've been an entrepreneur. The maintenance piece is also important because you have to file your registrations every year. Sometimes you have to make certain disclosures with those registrations. It depends. Sometimes you have to pay annual filing fees and submit certain documents. And so sometimes you'll need legal support for that. So don't ignore the importance of just doing a check-in with your attorney maybe once a year if you're not already working with them on something else, just to make sure you're on the up and up with the maintenance. Because what you don't want is for, it's called different things in different states, but it might be like the Department of Revenue, Department of Business Services, something like that, to come knocking on your door because you didn't take care of something important. And sometimes you don't find things out until something else is on the line. And then it's like rushing and it just looks bad. You also want to make sure you have legal protection around taxes and fraud. And the funny thing about taxes is that sometimes is not intentional, right? Like most people, I would venture to say, are not intentionally embezzling or committing tax fraud. But there are all types of things that you could be doing that actually might result in you committing that crime. And the sad thing is, no matter what your intent was, if you did it, you did it. And the IRS does not play. The other part to this is your accountant and your tax professional is driven by helping you lower your tax burden. That's their main goal. And as a part of that, keeping you compliant. But they want to help you avoid paying unnecessary taxes. Sometimes, though, that can be in enmity against your pursuit of long term legal protections. So, my lowering the tax burden, whether that's, increasing the amount of donations I make or increasing expenses toward the end of the year or whatever the case may be, a lawyer might tell you, hey, I get why you doing that, but you might not want to because you talked about your 3-year plan, and your 3-year plan is to be able to expand internationally, and some of those investments aren't going to look good. So lawyers can be helpful. It's not that your tax professional is trying to get you to commit fraud. Again, tax professionals and legal professionals, they just have different foci. Their focus is very different on how they want to support your business. And so having both perspectives helps you to make an informed decision as the business leader. You also want to have protection regarding employment. I was mentioning about some of the advice that I gave my client about independent contractor versus employee status. There are tons of issues around employee. This could be from your policy. So that same client, I'm working with them on developing their policy manual around everything from travel to reimbursement to sexual harassment, to acceptable use policies, especially in the age of all of this hacking and AI and technology. You need to have the right policies in place to protect your business. And this could be everything from, hey, you hired a marketing professional in another country to write and post your social media content. What are your policies that they have to adhere to internally to protect yourself from copyright infringement or from fraudulent activity? All of those things matter because they're in another country. So their country's laws might be totally different. This is also true if you are using a service. So maybe you didn't hire that person as an individual, you're using a service to hire them. Well, guess what? That's a different relationship. So again, legal support can help you to understand those nuances, protect yourself, but then also set you up for success so that as you hire more people and scale your company, you are not creating more problems for yourself because, and this applies to any of the areas that I'm naming, precedent matters. So let's say you get to, okay, I'll use my company as an example. I'm heading into year 10 this year of entrepreneurship. I have hired about 5 people over the years in waves, though. And at this point now, let's say I hire somebody next year and it's not working out, and I say, you know what, I need to terminate you. If they sue me, a judge would look at how have I handled all of my separation processes in the past, what are the legal standards for the state in which my company was formed in, also what are the standards for the state in which they were performing work, because that's the other part. So if you, and this is why I be telling people, you don't always want to do all that. I'm gonna start a corporation in another state because there ain't no taxes. Guess what? Even though that's the governance for your company, if people were primarily performing work in another state, that potentially could create the prevailing standard or the precedent for how that case is judged or how that case is handled. So again, for me, I've now had certain experiences three in three waves with employees handled a certain way. And from the beginning, from the very first time that I was managing employees in my company, I consulted an attorney and was like, hey, how should I handle this? This is what I was thinking, just based off of my experiences with employment law. You think that makes sense? Blah, blah, blah. Making sure I had the right forms in. Separation notices have been reviewed by my attorney, making sure that I document things appropriately, because I'm thinking not just this immediate moment, but 10 years from now, if I have an issue that happens, they'll be able to look and see, oh, Kaylin always has appropriate termination letters. Oh, Kaylin always does appropriate payouts. Oh, Kaylin, right? Because that precedent is what is going to have a significant impact on the decision that's made years from now. So you want to protect yourself. Also, we think about intellectual property. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time there because I have a whole series that I've talked about intellectual property protections. And that was done in partnership with the USPTO and a whole slew of attorneys. They were amazing. It was a four-part series last December and January. So I would encourage you to check out those videos. I'll try to drop them in the comments so that you can be able to watch those. But intellectual property protection is critical, and that's everything from trademarking your name, your company name and logo, sometimes even trademarking your moniker. So you might want to, if you use a special name, you might want to trademark that. Key phrases or slogans that you use, it could be patents, it could be trade secrets that you protect, it could be copywriting your materials. And the thing here is that lawyers will help you understand what how you can schedule that out. So for example, my attorney, we had like a 2-year schedule because I had about 20 trademarks. And again, that stuff is expensive, not just in paying the lawyer fees, but also paying the fee to the USPTO or whatever other agency if you're doing international IP protection. So it's not cheap. And so we got on the schedule of like, hey, what do you need to protect now versus what do you need to protect over time? And it's been wonderful, right? Just being able to follow that and know that I'm protected at all times. We actually are on, I think we on the last one of that schedule, and it will be done probably by the end of this year at the latest. Um, but it's exciting to watch your company evolve into something that's worth protecting, and really is worth protecting from day one. So again, just be thoughtful about that. They'll also tell you when to wait. So let's say you went, the cheaper route just to get your business up and running, and you got like some little logo made, but you're not married to that when you actually want something a little different. They might tell you, hey, for now, trademark the word mark, right? The name of your company, because you're probably gonna keep that, but we can wait to trademark the logo until it evolves into, the thing that you want next. Those are helpful conversations because once you file for IP protections, if you make substantive changes, you have to refile that, right? And so again, there's maintenance that goes along with that, tons of stuff. Watch the series. It was wonderful. It tells you everything that you need to know. The next area is insurance. You need insurance, whether that is liability insurance. I'm a consultant, so errors and omission insurance. Um, if you are in construction, bonding, right, insurance or for workers' compensation, all of those things are important, and lawyers can help you figure out what to protect and how. Yes, you could go straight to insurance companies, but guess what? Insurance companies are there to make money. So they're going to upsell you. They're going to give you the biggest package. And a lawyer might be able to tell you, hey, you're going to need that in probably about a year, but you can parse it out, save yourself some money for a second, and just focus on these areas. The next area is board relations. So if you are a corporation, whether S Corp or C Corp, and you have a board, An attorney will help you with managing that board, because guess what? Your board members are responsible for protecting their interests. Yes, they're responsible for the company, but they need to protect themselves too. So who is looking out for you? And you want a lawyer to make sure that, I don't care if it's your mama and daddy on the board, that you are protecting yourself and the entity that you've put a whole lot of work in to start. You also want to pay attention to image and PR legal advice. Listen, whoever that man was, what is it, astronomer at the Coldplay concert, a lawyer probably could have helped him to be like, don't go nowhere in public with this person. Like, I don't know why you doing that. Right. And I think those types of things often go under the radar. Like, we wouldn't always think to have an attorney for that, but it matters. I don't know why Disney keep coming up today. But when I worked for Disney, like, the legal team, especially talking to us as HR, they would pull our little coattails all the time and be like, mm-mm, mm-mm, we don't do that. Like, straight up, they would just be like, "No, we don't rock like that. Do this instead." And it was expected that before you made major decisions, big launches, public projects, even putting stuff out to employees, because again, I worked in HR, so everything wasn't always public facing. A lot of times it was internal facing. But even before you put out like company wide communications, you better have legal on that call. You better have employee relations on that call. And I learned a lot in that instance of the importance of legal consultation, not just legal uh, fixing. I'll say it like that. And that's a part of legal partnership too. And then you want to look at crisis management, going back to Mr. Astronomer, former CEO. I don't know who his legal team is, but I have a feeling that maybe they're giving him bad advice if he even has one. Like, I can't say for sure, but the way he's moving feels odd to me. In situations like that with crisis management, you usually are going to go one of three directions. You are either going to try to sweep it under the rug, um, which could come in the form of denial or ignoring it. You also could go the way of mitigation, meaning I know this is not going to go away, but I'm going to try to like massage it little by little or in stages to help lessen the negative impact. Or you got to just lean into it sometimes, own it, and just take it and use it to convert it into something else. In his case, the the choice to pretend like he is not solely accountable for how this is played out is just so fascinating to me, because having a long-term affair on your partner is a choice. It is a repeated choice. It is an escalating choice that only increases your risk over time. And I don't understand why he doesn't see why it would not only have personal impacts, but also professional impacts into his image as a leader and his ability to lead a company, right? Like, affairs in and of themselves are not uncommon. So, romantic issues complicating your business image, like, that happens all the time. What is uncommon for Mr. Man is this idea that somehow the musical artist is at fault. The I was about to say the side chick, the mistress slash other executive is at fault. This would have been one of those things if it were me, which it's not me. It's probably never gonna be me. If it were me, I would have simply stated, first of all, I'm sorry. Let me go back. Let's go back, because remember I said it's preventive versus prescriptive. So let's go back. First of all, he did right. The whole situation is wrong, but he played it right by going to this concert, which is technically, I guess, in like no man's land. So it wasn't like he was at State Farm Arena or, Madison Square Garden. Okay. So in that regard, yes, that was on point. But he was out of pocket because he had the company set up the travel plans. That's a no. This man clearly makes enough money to have both a personal assistant and an executive assistant in the company. If you gonna have an affair, I'm gonna need you to get your personal assistant to set that up out of your private bank account. That's right there. And that's probably why he ended up getting fired, because you're stealing company time, potentially company funds, and misusing labor in the company to do this personal violation. Absolutely not. And it's bringing negative press to the company. Where he also messed up is he's standing up canoodling in plain sight. The thing is that a bunch of people had pictures of them because they standing up when everybody else sitting down. Stop it with the attention seeking behaviors if you out of pocket. If you wrong as two left shoes, sit your beep beep down. Sit down. You should be standing up. We would not have even known that those people were there, period, if they had been sitting down. So you already attention seeking. So you out of pocket. Then after the fallout, he refused to resign. Now, whether that was because he was negotiating his golden parachute or because he was negotiating the terms or the statement, the public statement, whatever it was, it took way too long for him to resign. And to the board's credit, I know they were trying to avoid firing him because I think he was co-founder. And see, those co-founder versus like hired CEO relationships are weird, because with a co-founder, and I actually had a client one time, they had to let a co-founder go, not while I was working with them, but just at a certain point, because again, crisis management. Oftentimes founders are so integral to the brand story that if you fire them recklessly, it also undermines the brand, because it's their brilliance that is the impetus of the company. And if you let them go, then technically it's like, well, is the company bad too? So that can be tricky. So him stretching that out like that, whether again it was holding up for more money in the golden parachute or better terms, it could have even been health insurance. It could have been any number of reasons why it took that long, but that was too long. Um, and then he messed up because then even in his public statement, he still blaming other people. Sir, we not responsible for you not being able to keep your pants zipped up. That has nothing to do with us. That's a you problem. And if it were me, again, it was not me, but if it were me, my statement would have read something like, I recognize that my recklessness has impacted the lives of not only my family, but also my other, partner, as well as the company. And my refusal to act with integrity has no impact on the amazing company that has been built. I apologize to the staff, blah, blah, blah. Like straight contrition, then say, I'm actually stepping away to take time with my family to make this transition as smooth as possible for them and protect them in ways that I haven't up to this point. Full stop, the end. Now I'm going offline. Period. Like all of this, what should have been a private moment. What? You at a public concert, my guy? There is no private moment. Like, it ain't no private moment. That's why, a lot of times there are people who, when you find out they had a mistress or a side piece or whatever, you be like, what? Because they've crafted an image that's so locked tight that is like, oh my God, I couldn't even believe it. Yeah, they probably been messing around with this person or other people all the time, but there's a way you conduct your affairs. Like I said, it's wrong all around, but just from a straight crisis management standpoint, there is a way that you do things that won't result in you blowing your whole life up. All right. Last but not least, just general advising. Like I was mentioning about my attorney, we had an appointment for something totally different, but this other issue came up, and I'm like, "What you think about blah blah blah?" We've had other conversations where I was like, you know what, I'm thinking of doing this. How the conversation came up because I was talking to her about the different products that I had as we were making the template service agreement. And so on my service agreement, there's a checklist of the different types of services I offer. And when I was naming them, she was like, "Oh, you got a survey product?" I said, "Yeah." And she was like, "Are you gonna license that? Do you want to put that on there?" And I was like, "Oh, I never thought about that." So that opened a whole conversation of what I then could use to protect myself, and it has served me well. So again, the preventive side of legal support often falls under general advising. You being able to have that person to ask questions and talk to about ideas that you're coming up with and ways to protect yourself along the way. This is also why having dedicated support is so important. All right, so the last thing I wanted to spend time going over um, is, you know, I want to talk about fiduciary duty. And a lot of times we think fiduciary duty only applies to financial investors or even just attorney and client, but it actually falls under the way we as entrepreneurs have to show up for our companies too. So, as an entrepreneur, I have a fiduciary responsibility and duty to my company to behave in certain ways. And in you understanding your fiduciary responsibility, I think that it will help you have a better partnership with your attorney because in you behaving and conducting yourself in a way that protects the company, it makes your attorney's job a lot easier. So, here are the fiduciary duties that I found, and I pulled this from a few different sources, but one of the main sources I looked at was Investopedia. It gave me a good start, and then I did some more research. So there are a few. The first duty is duty of care. You have a responsibility to protect your company. You have a responsibility to shepherd and guide your company in a way that is not causing it to implode. And I know that sounds like common sense, but in this age of scamming and quick buck and we just stand up companies as shells to launder money. I mean, this, y'all know I live in Atlanta, so this all the time. When you start a company, whether it is an LLC, which is a disregarded entity, sole proprietorship, a partnership, corporation, whatever the type is, you have a responsibility to act in the company's best interests. Period. You can't just do anything. There are certain things that I would not do as Kalen that I do for my company just because I know it's in the company's best interest. And again, this is particularly true if you have a staff, but even if you're a sole, prop, solopreneur, you still have to act in the company's best interests because you are benefiting from the company being a separate entity from you. So, because you benefit from that company, you have a responsibility to act in the best interest of that separate entity. You also have the duty of loyalty. So, particularly if you subcontract a lot, you cannot be more loyal to your primes than to your own company, right? So, for example, last year I did a lot of subcontract. I think I was on like 6 different subcontracts. I probably would not do that no more. I was not with it. But part of why I terminated pretty much all of those contracts is because it caused me to be disloyal to my company's philosophy, values, the precedent of how I handle client relations, even financial management, etc. There were subcontracts where it was clear I was being underpaid, where it was clear that they were trying to steal my intellectual property, where it was clear that the way they interacted with clients and handled their clients was so egregious to me based on how I deal with it. I'm like, I'm going to undermine my company's value and brand if I stay on this contract. And unfortunately, that's not something I'm willing to do. So I terminated the contracts. Could I have kept doing it and maybe gotten paid some money? Yeah, possibly. Could I have kept doing it and maybe that would have salvaged that relationship? Yeah. But in reality, for me, what I realized was like, this isn't even worth me salvaging. I'm straight on all of this. I don't want nothing to do with these folks. And because my loyalty is to this entity, Forward Collective Group, I had to make a decision and back on up. You also have a duty of good faith. This one is important because you want to be able to make informed decisions that you can stand behind later. So I haven't always made the best choices for my company, but I did do my best to make informed choices that I thought would be in the company's best interest. And if you are constantly making choices, knowing that that's shady business, knowing that that's going to result in the company being mishandled, knowing that that's going to result in a crisis, you set yourself up with a ton of legal vulnerability that's going to be hard to justify in court if it ever comes down to it. I'm thinking of, again, y'all know it's Atlanta. I'm thinking of some of these companies where it's like you purposely frauding, right? Defrauding customers. You're purposely telling people that you offer something or that they get this service or that they this stuff isn't true. A good example, I just saw this news story about out of it was out of South Carolina about um was it shrimp or craw? I think it was shrimp that a shrimp farmers association, excuse me if I'm saying the wrong terminology, but it was like the shrimp farmers association is suing companies that they say are saying that they're offering a particular type of seafood and it's really not, and then they're stamping it with saying it's South Carolina bred. So let's say they telling people that it's perch when it's really catfish. Now y'all know I'm talking about Detroit roots, talking about perch. But let's say they say it's perch when it's no, they're saying it's catfish when it's really perch, right? And so now this association is starting to sue people, and they like calling companies out publicly. That's good. They should, because those companies are not acting in good faith. And they have now violated their fiduciary duty of good faith by lying about what they're selling to customers. Because, first of all, somebody could have an allergy, somebody could have a religious, be religious, have a religious uh, violation for consuming that product or whatever. And if you're telling people it's A and it's really B, you dead wrong, right? So those types of decisions, they impact not just the brand but also you, and you could be sued for that. You also have the duty of confidentiality. That's one of the reasons why everything is not content to me. So the folks who vlog everything and every time they breathe they streaming it, guess what, you're actually totally violating your fiduciary duties, because some things need to be confidential. There are tons of things I've had cooking for years that was just sitting, simmering in the pot, and I never say anything about it to anyone. Why? Because I'm protecting the entity that is my company, and it doesn't require divulging that information yet. It would actually be in the company's disinterest, right? It would be a problem for the company for me to even speak on that. And that could be contract negotiations or opportunities, things like that. Good example, if you're going for these RFPs, a lot of times they'll put in there when you can disclose that you won the RFP. If you go blabbing about you did it beforehand, guess what? You could lose that. And then if you have subcontractors or somebody else who was working on it with you and they know you lost that contract because you were running your mouth, they can sue you. And they probably will win because it's stated in the agreement not to say anything until 10 days after public notification or something like that. And at that point, you're violating confidentiality. Last two, prudence, making wise decisions. This is why founder development and entrepreneur development is so important. I usually never miss the opportunity to take a class or to do an incubator program. I don't always do the ones that are 6 weeks, 12 weeks, etc. Because I just don't always have that time. But I went. it was like a 2 year period where I went to almost everyone I could find, and some of them went on for a while. Matter of fact, it was at one point I was doing like three at the same time. I was doing three at the same time, and thankfully they were on different days, at different times of the day. But I was going to learn because I knew I couldn't make good decisions as the leader of my company until I had more information. And I have a fiduciary duty to make prudent decisions. It is not good enough to make the excuse of, oh, I didn't know. Because why didn't you go learn? You could Google it, that's free. You could go to a free coaching session. There are tons of places that offer free coaching all the time. Go pursue it. Go learn what you need to learn that is specific to your market. I'm not going taking classes on real estate. I'm not going taking classes on tech entrepreneurship. That's not my industry. But I'm gonna go take a class on service-based businesses. I'm gonna go take a class on employment law because I know that with the services that I offer, I have clients that will ask about certain things. So I want to make informed decisions about my company that can then support me making informed decisions with my clients. And last but not least, disclosure. Informing the people who you work with, whether that is vendors, employees, contractors, etc., being smart enough and responsible enough to disclose the information you need to so that others can make informed decisions too. So for my people who have especially a team of people, those team meetings are important, not just to check in to make sure everyone is doing their work, but you might want to be disclosing what's happening with the company. We've all seen stories of it's again, go Atlanta, somebody go to walk into especially a restaurant or a club or something and the thing closed down, right? It was a story, was it last year? I think it was last year. Employees showing up for work, child, the restaurants equipment sitting outside. I had a situation, matter of fact, I ain't gonna tell that lady Hope is, but it's somebody who I go to for services, and all of a sudden she moved. And I was like, hey girl, where you move? And she was like, girl, they got put out of the spot and I lost some of my stuff. If she really wanted to, she could go sue the person who was open, who ran the spot where she was running her business. You have to disclose what is needed so that others can make informed decisions too. So, to review the fiduciary duties, again, it's duty of care, duty of loyalty, duty of good faith, duty of confidentiality, duty of prudence, and duty of disclosure. Now, here's my final point, and then I'm gonna run because we actually overtime. All of that is so important because as more and more people are scamming in business, and believe me, with the way the economy is going, it's gonna get even worse. The more you strengthen your legal defenses early, the better you will be able to see a scam, avoid a scam, mitigate the impacts of a scam, and lessen the negative effects on you individually and your company of a scam. So there are some things that I never have to worry about because I already got certain things protected for myself. There are certain things that people can try that I could see. I'm like, that ain't right because I got my paperwork in order. There are things that I'm able to see that I'm getting ready to step into or maybe start it, and I'm like, ooh, nope, let me back out of that because I know how to protect myself. And I have protected myself. And then finally, there are things that sometimes through no fault of my own have happened, but I'm able to back out of it safely and minimize the negative impact because I've protected myself. And a lot of that protection comes from having the right partnership, being intentional about how I set up early structure, and knowing how to research and where to go to get the right information to make the best decision. I hope that this helped. I know the legal part, like I said, can be a little daunting as an entrepreneur, especially if you don't have a legal background. It brings up a lot of bad feelings for a lot of people, but it's necessary because this is your baby. This is your thing that you either started or that you're running. sometimes you might have a team where people are relying on you to have your stuff together, and you don't want to go it alone, and you don't want to just be shooting darts in the dark. Make informed decisions, make the best decisions that you can, and most of all, protect yourself. I hope this was helpful to you all. Of course, like I said at the top, we are headed toward the last session. So next week is the last one. If you have not registered for it, please do so. We're going to be talking about strategic planning. I'm looking forward to that one. It's going to tie everything together. And if you haven't yet, check out all the other sessions that are available on YouTube. They're housed there. It's called For Fellow Founders, that playlist with all of my webinars. Of course, this is Resilience University. I'm looking forward to our final session to help you make it through what I know are challenging economic times for a lot of us. So take care, have a wonderful week, and I will catch y'all next Tuesday. Bye.